You have played thousands of hands to reach this moment. You have survived the variance, navigated the minefield of the middle stages, and outlasted hundreds of players who wanted the same thing you want. You are at the final table. 9 players remain. The cameras are rolling, the lights are brighter, the rail is buzzing, and somewhere deep in your chest, something has shifted. Your heart beats differently now. Your thoughts move faster. Your hands feel the chips with a new kind of awareness. You tell yourself this is excitement. You tell yourself you are ready. But what you do not realize is that you have already started making mistakes. Not because you lack skill, not because you forgot your strategy, but because the final table is a fundamentally different game, and almost no one treats it that way. Here is a truth that will reframe everything you think you know about tournament poker. The final table is not where money is won. It is where money is lost. The difference between first place and fifth place is often more than the total prize pool of most tournaments you have ever played. And yet, players who have been disciplined, patient, and strategically sound for 12 hours suddenly begin making decisions that hemorrhage expected value. They do not notice. They think they are playing well. They think they are being smart. But the pressure has already altered their perception. The payout structure has already corrupted their logic. And the fear of losing what they have already earned has already begun to dominate every decision they make. This is not a video about how to play final tables. This is a video about why you are losing money at final tables without realizing it. It is about the invisible forces that transform competent players into passive survivors. It is about the psychological traps that feel like smart adjustments, but are actually catastrophic leaks. And it is about the single most important mental shift you must make if you ever want to maximize your tournament earnings. Most poker content teaches you what to do. This video will show you what you are already doing wrong, and once you see it, you will never unsee it. The moment you reach the final table, a fundamental shift occurs in your brain. It happens automatically, beneath conscious awareness, and it affects every decision you make from that point forward. Your brain stops playing to win and starts playing to survive. This is not a strategic adjustment. It is a biological response to perceived threat. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a poker tournament and a predator in the wild. All it knows is that something valuable is at stake, that loss is possible, and that survival is the priority. This survival mode manifests in subtle but devastating ways. You start folding hands you would normally play. You stop applying pressure in spots where aggression would print money. You wait for better opportunities that never come. You convince yourself that patience is the correct strategy, when in reality, patience has become a disguise for fear. You are no longer playing poker. You are protecting what you have. And in tournament poker, protection is destruction. The irony is brutal. The same instinct that helped your ancestors survive on the savannah is now costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars in expected value. Your brain is trying to keep you safe, but safety at a poker final table is an illusion. There is no safe path to first place. There is only the path that maximizes your equity, and that path requires risk, aggression, and the willingness to lose everything you have accumulated. Watch any final table carefully. You will see this pattern emerge within minutes. Players who were aggressive during the middle stages suddenly become passive. Players who were 3-betting light begin flatting with premium hands. Players who were attacking weakness start respecting every bet. This is survival mode in action, and the players who recognize it in themselves are the players who have a chance to overcome it. The ones who do not will continue to min-cash their way through a career of missed opportunities. The question is not whether you experience survival mode. You do. Everyone does. The question is whether you are aware of it, and whether you have developed the mental tools to override your own biology when the stakes are highest. There is a concept in tournament poker that most players understand intellectually, but almost no one truly internalizes. It is called ICM, the independent chip model, and it quantifies the relationship between your chip stack and your actual monetary equity in the tournament. At a final table, ICM pressure becomes overwhelming. Every chip you risk carries a different value than it did an hour ago. Winning a pot no longer means winning chips. It means increasing your share of the remaining prize pool. And losing a pot no longer means losing chips. It means sliding down the payout ladder in a way that can never be recovered. This creates a paradox that breaks most players. To maximize your ICM equity, You must sometimes play in ways that seem counterintuitive. You must fold hands that are mathematically profitable in chip EV terms. You must avoid confrontations with players who can eliminate you. You must apply pressure to players who cannot afford to call. And you must do all of this while simultaneously recognizing when the opposite is true, when aggression is correct even under ICM pressure, when the risk is justified because the reward reshapes the entire payout structure in your favor. Here is where most players fail. They learn that ICM means playing tighter. They absorb the idea that risk is dangerous near the money, and they apply this lesson so blindly, so universally, that they become exploitable. They fold every time pressure is applied. They refuse to defend their blinds. They give up small pots repeatedly because they are terrified of playing big pots. And in doing so, they bleed chips so slowly that they do not notice the damage until it is too late. The truth about ICM is more nuanced than any simple rule can capture. Yes, you must respect the payout structure. Yes, certain risks are not worth taking. But the players who win final tables are not the ones who avoid risk. They are the ones who understand exactly which risks to take and which to avoid. They are the ones who recognize that passing up small edges repeatedly is itself a form of destruction. They are the ones who know that sometimes the most ICM correct play is to shove all in and force your opponents to make the impossible decision. ICM is not a reason to play scared. It is a weapon. And the players who wield it properly are the ones who collect the trophies. There is a moment at every final table that separates the players who will finish in the middle of the pack from the players who will compete for first place. It is not a specific hand. It is not a dramatic all-in confrontation. It is a quiet internal decision that happens without fanfare, often without conscious awareness. It is the moment when a player stops thinking about moving up the payout ladder and starts thinking about winning. Most players never make this shift. They remain locked in what might be called ladder thinking. Their decisions are driven entirely by the next payout jump. They ask themselves questions like, if I fold here, do I survive to the next elimination? If I call and lose, do I drop from 5th to 7th in the payouts? If I just wait, will someone else bust and move me up? These questions are not unreasonable. They reflect a genuine understanding of tournament structure, but they are the wrong questions. They are questions asked by players who have already accepted that they will not win. They are questions that guarantee a median finish. They are questions that turn the final table into a waiting game rather than a competition. The players who win final tables ask different questions. They ask, what is the play that maximizes my chance of first place? What is the play that accumulates chips for the endgame? What is the play that establishes dominance while others are retreating? This does not mean they are reckless. It does not mean they ignore ICM. It means they have made a fundamental decision about their objective. They are not trying to move from 7th to 6th. They are trying to win. And every decision they make is filtered through that lens. Here is the uncomfortable truth. If you reach a final table and your primary goal is to avoid busting, you have already lost. Not the tournament necessarily, but the equity, the money, the opportunity. You have surrendered the most valuable thing a final table offers, which is the chance to compete for a life-changing first-place prize. And you have traded it for the comfort of a slightly higher guaranteed finish. That trade is almost always wrong. There is a type of mistake that happens exclusively at final tables, and it is almost never discussed in poker training content. It is the mistake of overvaluing your tournament life relative to the situation you are facing. Players call it playing scared. But that term is too simple. What actually happens is more subtle and more destructive. When you sit down at a final table, your tournament life feels precious in a way it did not before. You have invested hours. You have survived countless all-in situations. You have navigated the bubble, the money, the redraw. Your seat at this table represents everything you have accomplished. And because of this emotional investment, you begin to treat your tournament life as more valuable than it actually is. This manifests in specific patterns. You fold to aggression even when your hand is strong enough to call. You refuse to commit chips without an absolute premium. You let aggressive players steal pot after pot because you cannot stomach the thought of busting in a confrontation. You tell yourself, you are picking your spots. But you are not picking spots. You are avoiding them. The problem is that your tournament life is not infinitely valuable. It has a specific ICM value. It is worth a specific dollar amount based on your stack size, the remaining players, and the payout structure. And sometimes, that value is less than the pot you are being offered. Sometimes, the mathematically correct play is to risk elimination for a shot at accumulating chips that will dramatically increase your equity. But you do not see it this way. You see your tournament life as sacred. You see elimination as catastrophe, and you make decisions accordingly. This is how players who deserve to win final tables end up finishing sixth. They had the skill to get there. They had the reads, the fundamentals, the experience. But when the moment arrived, they valued survival over equity. They protected their tournament life at the expense of their actual expected value. And they watched someone else collect the first place prize because that person understood something they did not. Your tournament life is a resource. It is meant to be deployed, not preserved. There is a phenomenon that occurs at almost every final table, and it is so common that it has become invisible. It is the phenomenon of the chip leader playing passively. You have seen it countless times. A player accumulates a dominant stack through aggressive, skilled play. They reach the final table with twice as many chips as their nearest competitor. And then something strange happens. They stop playing the way that got them there. They tighten up. They wait for premium hands. They let the shorter stacks battle each other. They reason that with such a large stack, they can afford to be patient. They believe that playing conservatively will protect their lead and allow them to cruise into the top three. They think they are playing smart. They are making an enormous mistake. The chip lead at a final table is not a cushion. It is a weapon. It is the most powerful position in tournament poker because it allows you to apply pressure that no one else can apply. You can call off lighter. You can shove wider. You can force opponents into impossible decisions where every option is bad for their equity. You can systematically dismantle every stack at the table while they are too afraid to fight back. But most chip leaders do none of this. They squander the advantage. They allow short stacks to double up. They let medium stacks grow into threats. They watch their lead evaporate not through dramatic coolers, but through 1,000 small surrenders. They enter heads-up play with a marginal advantage instead of a dominant one. And they wonder why they lose. The reason is simple. They treated the chip lead as something to protect rather than something to use. They fell into the same survival mindset that affects everyone at the final table, even though their position should have freed them from that mindset entirely. If you ever find yourself at a final table with the chip lead, remember this. You did not build that stack by playing safe. You built it by applying pressure, by taking risks, by making your opponents uncomfortable. The final table is not the time to abandon what works. It is the time to amplify it. There is a category of mistake that happens specifically because players are being watched. It does not happen in home games. It does not happen in anonymous online tournaments. It happens at final tables with cameras, with rails, with poker media present, with the knowledge that this moment might be replayed, analyzed, and remembered. This is the ego mistake, and it costs more money than most players will ever realize. The ego mistake takes many forms. Sometimes it is the refusal to fold a hand that should be folded because folding would look weak on television. Sometimes it is a hero call made to prove a read was correct, rather than because the call was profitable. Sometimes it is an aggressive bluff designed to impress the audience rather than to win chips. And sometimes it is a passive, frightened line taken because the player is terrified of looking foolish if their big move fails. All of these mistakes share a common root. The player is no longer making decisions based on expected value. They are making decisions based on how those decisions will be perceived by others. They have allowed external judgment to enter their internal calculus, and the moment that happens, their decision-making is compromised. The players who win final tables have learned to silence this voice. They understand that poker is not a performance. It is a competition. They understand that the audience does not pay their bills. The chips do. They understand that looking foolish in a single hand is irrelevant if the long-term play is correct. And they understand that the greatest poker players in history are not remembered for never making mistakes. They are remembered for making the right decisions over and over, regardless of how those decisions looked in the moment. If you find yourself at a final table and catch yourself thinking about how a decision will appear to others, stop. Recognize that thought for what it is.
a distraction, an ego trap, a leak disguised as self-awareness. Then make the decision that maximizes your equity, regardless of optics. The rail will forget. Your bankroll will remember. There is a specific type of read that becomes unreliable at final tables, and almost no one accounts for it. It is the read based on how an opponent has played earlier in the tournament. Players build profiles over hours of play. They notice patterns, they catalog tendencies, and they bring all of this information to the final table, confident that they understand their opponents. But here is what they miss. Their opponents are different now. The pressure has changed them. The player who was loose and aggressive at the feature table is now tight and cautious with a short stack and a guaranteed payout at risk. The player who seemed passive and straightforward is now shoving any two cards because they recognize this is their only path to relevance. The player who appeared fearless is now paralyzed by the proximity to life-changing money. Final table pressure does not affect everyone equally. Some players become more aggressive as a response to stress. Others become more conservative. Some rise to the occasion. Others crumble. And unless you recalibrate your reads to account for this transformation, you will be playing against ghosts of who your opponents used to be rather than who they are right now. This is why the most valuable skill at a final table is not memory. It is observation. Real-time, present-moment observation of how players are behaving right now, in this hand, under this specific pressure. Are they taking longer to act than they were an hour ago? Are they checking their chips more frequently? Are they looking at the payout screen? Are they making eye contact or avoiding it? These micro-behaviors reveal more about an opponent's current mental state than any hand history ever could. And the players who learn to read these signals have an enormous edge over those who rely solely on accumulated profiles. The final table is not a continuation of the tournament. It is a new game with the same players but different psychology. Treat it accordingly. There is a critical error that even skilled players make when they reach the final table with a short stack. It is an error of timing. They know they need to make a move. They know their stack is dwindling. They know that every orbit costs them equity. And yet they wait for a better hand. They wait for a better position. They wait for a better moment. The moment never comes, or it comes too late. Their stack shrinks from 12 big blinds to 8 to 5 to 3. And by the time they finally commit, their shove has no fold equity. They are called by hands that would have folded 20 minutes earlier. They bust in 7th place when they could have competed for 3rd, and they tell themselves they were unlucky. They were not unlucky. They were late. The short stack at a final table has one job: to find a spot to double before the stack becomes irrelevant. This does not mean shoving blindly. It means recognizing that the window of opportunity is small and closing. It means acting while there is still fold equity to capture. It means making moves that feel uncomfortable because the alternative is guaranteed elimination through attrition. The opposite error also exists. It is the error of moving too early, too desperately, in spots where patience would have allowed for a better opportunity. But this error is far less common at final tables. The overwhelming tendency is hesitation, waiting, hoping. And by the time hope is abandoned, it is too late. If you reach a final table with a short stack, make peace with the fact that you will probably need to take a risk that feels premature. The hands you are waiting for may never come. The position you want may never materialize, and every hand you fold is a percentage of your equity that disappears forever. Better to act too early than to die waiting for permission. There is a form of final table destruction that does not look like destruction at all. It looks like discipline. It looks like good poker. It looks like patient, thoughtful play from a player who knows what they are doing. And it is the most expensive leak in tournament poker. It is the leak of giving up small pots. At the final table, with ICM pressure weighing heavily and every confrontation carrying elimination risk, players become remarkably willing to surrender small pots without resistance. They fold their blinds to raises. They check and fold to small bets. They give up on hands that miss even when their opponent is unlikely to have connected either. Each individual surrender seems reasonable. The pot is small. The risk is not worth it. Better to wait for a real spot. But these small surrenders accumulate. Over the course of a final table, they represent a massive transfer of equity from the passive player to the aggressive one.
The player who steals blinds every orbit is adding chips at a rate that compounds dramatically. The player who surrenders those blinds is bleeding at the same rate. And after 2 hours, the difference between these players is not small. It is often the difference between first place and fifth place. This is why the most dangerous players at a final table are not the ones with the biggest stacks. They are the ones who fight for every pot, regardless of size. They are the ones who 3-bet light, who float flops, who stab at turns when weakness is shown. They are the ones who understand that final table equity is built in the margins, not in the dramatic, all-in confrontations that everyone remembers. If you find yourself at a final table letting small pots go without resistance, recognize what is happening. You are not being disciplined. You are being exploited, and the player doing the exploiting is taking your money in increments so small that you do not even realize it is happening. Fight for the small pots. That is where the money lives. Everything you have just learned leads to a single conclusion. The final table is not what you thought it was. It is not a reward for surviving. It is not a stage for cautious play. It is not a place where the chips you have already earned should be protected at all costs. The final table is an opportunity. It is the only moment in tournament poker where the decisions you make can alter your financial future in a matter of hours. It is the one time when the difference between correct play and incorrect play is measured not in buy-ins, but in life-changing sums. And it is the moment when most players, even good ones, abandon everything they know and surrender to fear. You do not have to be one of those players. You now understand how survival mode corrupts your decisions. You understand how ICM can be a weapon instead of a cage. You understand the difference between ladder thinking and winning thinking. You understand why chip leaders fail and short stacks hesitate. You understand the role of ego, the limits of historical reads, the critical importance of timing. You understand that small pots matter as much as big ones. But understanding is not enough. These patterns are deeply ingrained. The biological responses are powerful. The fear is real. Overcoming these forces requires not just knowledge but practice. It requires deliberate mental training. It requires reviewing your final table decisions with brutal honesty. It requires catching yourself in survival mode and consciously choosing a different path. This is the work that separates tournament players who occasionally get lucky from tournament players who build legacies. If this video shifted how you think about final tables, subscribe to Mind of a Grinder. This channel exists for players who want more than surface-level strategy. It exists for players who understand that the edge is found in psychology, in mindset, in the invisible war that happens inside your own head. Leave a comment with the final table mistake you recognize in yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And prepare yourself, because the next video will go even deeper into the mental game that separates the great from the merely good. The final table is where most poker money is lost. But now you know why. And that knowledge makes you dangerous.